Hello, it's me, Anita, and today I'd like to talk about dysphoria. Now, in terms of helping people understand what the transgender experience is like, there are a couple of experiences that really have to be conveyed, hopefully in a way that other people can understand them. And one of those is dysphoria. And what I mean by dysphoria is a sense of unease, a sense that something is wrong. Um, it's a sense of dissatisfaction with life in general. And the first thing I want to say about dysphoria is it's very common. I think everybody experiences it. It's usually needed for a motivation to make a change. There's a sense that, well, something can be better, and so therefore there's something suboptimal or not as good or something wrong with the current situation, and therefore you're making a change. I don't think most people call it out as that. They just sort of feel this kind of urge to do something different, and they do. Um, so I think everybody experiences it. I don't think it's something that people um, call out a whole lot. And you can have dysphoria in a lot of different ways. There can be dysphoria about your body. There can be dysphoria about your social situation. You may feel that somehow you're not getting the respect, or that people see you because of the way you talk or the way you dress as being not having the respect that you feel like you should have. And then there's things that you can do to change that, either changing yourself or trying to change the perspective or the narrative of other people. And it's important to when we talk about dysphoria to know that there are a lot of cultural norms that come into this. There are a lot of cultural values that come into play with this. And we'll talk a little bit about this. Now, this is a complicated topic, and I can't really cover all that I need to do with dysphoria in this one. So I'm going to go sort of at a high level, and then there's going to be a second or follow-up video that will talk about it a little bit more on a personal level, if you will. When we talk about dysphoria, I've given you a couple of little examples of dysphoria, about one's body. My nose is too big, I'm too short, I'm too tall, um, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, I'm not muscular enough, and it's a sense somehow that your body is saying something or conveying or given a value or um, a meaning in the culture that you don't really feel fits you. And so there's a mismatch between who you think you are and how other people respond to you based on physical cues or based on social cues, based on economic cues. So there's a whole level of sort of societal and cultural norms, cultural values that play into this. Um, so when we get to talking about the transgender experience, there is a very specific dysphoria that we're talking about, and it's gender identity. Um, and when we talk about an identity dysphoria, we're talking about you do not feel that people are responding to you in the way that you identify. So, for example, um, someone who comes from a very poor background where there's not a lot of education, who gets education, who's very bright, because of the fact that they're coming out of this other situation, may feel that people are devaluing them or not seeing their intelligence or not respecting their intelligence because of the fact that there's this perception of, well, you come from that type of background, you couldn't possibly be an intelligent person. So it's that kind of thing when we talk about an identity dysphoria, that the social and cultural norms and values that people apply to you based on some criteria don't match how you feel about yourself and how you identify yourself. And for a transgender person like myself, that is very specific to gender identity. Now, I don't want to get into what gender is, and I don't really want to get into identity because those are rabbit holes that take a lot of exploration in their own. I'm not even sure I'm competent to talk about those in any way that's really meaningful. They're complicated subjects. I don't think most people understand them, and so I don't really want to try to go there. I think if you really are interested, there's some resources. Gender in particular, the Scientific American from September of 2017 has an excellent set of articles on the scientific nature of gender. But when we talk about gender identity dysphoria, there are different ways that people experience this. One of the things that gets really emphasized is the physical dysphoria. I feel like my body's wrong, or I resent the fact that I have breasts because I'm a trans man, or I resent the fact, personally, I resent the fact I don't have breasts because I'm a woman. And having breasts either triggers people to say that, well, you're a woman or you're a male, and it's one of the more visual cues. Secondary sexual characteristics, beards, for example, um, bald heads, like male pattern baldness, trigger people to say, "Oh, well, you're a man," or you're a woman, or and so there are a lot of physical characteristics that start becoming um, laden with meaning, if you will, that a transgender person finds problematic. People are responding and saying, well, you seem to be this, when your identity is something else. And what I mean by this sense of identity, again, within the gender identity, there is this real sense of there are specific culturally based gender roles and gender norms and gender values that are kind of assigned to women and men. And I don't want to make this sound black and white because it's a lot more complicated than that. There's you can sort of think of this set of values or this set of norms is more feminine, and this set of norms and this set of values is more male. You get this when there's some little gender questionnaires. What kind of gender are you? And you can go online, you can do these things, and if you really look at the questions, there are certain things that sort of are attributed as male and certain things that are attributed as female. And I always come out a little bit more male than I feel like I am on those things because I'm good at math. And that's something that's attributed to the male side for no particularly good reason. It's just the cultural expectation is that, well, men are good at math and women aren't. And so it gets... If it gets real slippery and you feel like you're not grasping it, that's part of the difficulty that being a trans person deals with, is trying to separate out what that identity actually is and what it actually means in terms of these cultural norms, these cultural expectations of who you are. But in general, I found that I identified as a woman. I liked talking to women. I felt more comfortable around women. I enjoyed doing things with women. I didn't enjoy hanging out with the guys. I enjoyed hanging out with the girls. And so there were a lot of things I would deny, but that gives you an idea of what I mean by identity. But so the physical manifestation of the body becomes very problematic. There's a lot of resentment that grows up around puberty for a lot of people who are transgender. And I'll talk more about the personal side of that in another video. But you start hearing people running the gamut from being very upset, hating their bodies, to people more like me who ultimately feel somewhat disassociated from their body. But I think most transgender people at some point in their lives feel very cut off from their body. It doesn't represent who they are. Emotional dysphoria. It's sort of talking about a feeling, and you sort of go, well, of course it's emotional. But emotional dysphoria, I mean that you start feeling like your feelings are wrong. You start having feelings that are more associated in the culture with the opposite gender. And or a mixture of feelings, but some of those feelings cause you a great deal of shame. There's a fear of expressing them. There is a fear of being in situations where they might get elicited because you feel that people would ridicule you if you start showing those. Um, and so, even within the dysphoria, this fear, this anxiety that starts growing, starts feeding on itself and creating even a stronger sense of dysphoria. What comes out of that, though, is this real tendency towards wanting to be secretive about what your feelings are. Um, I used to hate being in situations where they'd be talking about, sharing your feelings in sort of a group setting when I didn't know a lot of people, and it was always kind of one of those things of what do I share? I don't know. I don't know what I can say. Um, and and so you get to be very secretive. You start trying to figure out something that you can say that sounds right, but doesn't really show anything, that doesn't really expose anything. I don't know that that's specific to transgender people. I have a feeling a lot of people experience that, and so I mean, there's a lot of overlap with transgender feelings and regular feelings because we're the same. I mean, there's not that much difference. Um, and so, so there is this real sense of secretiveness that creeps in. And I talked a little bit about that anxiety. There's that anxiety of always being on guard, always having to watch and be aware of any situations, anything that might trigger somebody else to start seeing or ridiculing you or have you do something that makes you feel ashamed. Um, there's a social dysphoria that's associated with it. Um, you don't really. I talked about not feeling like I wanted to hang out with the guys. I just liked hanging out with the girls, but socially, growing up, at least in the area that I did, that really wasn't an option for a young man. Um, that was seen as being weird or perverted or strange, and the girls would have felt weird, and I would have felt weird, and everybody would have felt weird, and it really didn't feel good. Um, on the other hand, I really didn't feel like hanging out with guys. Um, so what I would do is I'd try to pick social situations or groups that I could be with girls, be with the girls, if you will. Um, but there was a reason, so or an externalization that said, okay, yeah, it's okay for this to happen. In particular, when I was in high school, there was a group that got together during sort of a free session and during the day when we could study Latin for the Latin state exam. And it turned out that I was the only male in the group. So I got to sort of hang out with these, I don't know, 4 or 5 other girls and the teacher who was a woman as well. Um, and spend time with them. It was my favorite time of the day. It was a social interaction I enjoyed. I ended up dating one of the girls, but I felt like the other girls in this little study group were all some of my best friends. I mean, we wouldn't chat on the phone and stuff like that. I mean, that still wasn't done. It had all sorts of other overtones. Um, and this is adolescence, and sexuality gets into it. Like I said, it gets to be a mess. It gets to be complicated, and at that age, I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have the experience, I didn't have the knowledge to even start dealing with it. So, but I can look back on that and I can say, oh, I like that because that's actually where I felt like I fit. That's where I felt like I should be socializing. Uh, and so you have this real sense of not fitting in anywhere socially. Um, there's a lot of people who feel lonely. There's a lot of people who feel very vulnerable. I think in this whole experience of gender identity dysphoria, um, because you don't fit, you don't really feel like there's anybody to sort of help you through things, and you're vulnerable to whatever comes along, and you're very vulnerable to being ashamed. You're very vulnerable to being embarrassed, and it goes back to that anxiety. That anxiety is there to try to protect you against that. And there are all sorts of things you start doing to deal with that. Um, One of the other things that's sort of not real obvious is that because of um, this sense of being somewhat disassociated from your body and from yourself, there's the real sense that there's a social persona that you give to other people to satisfy, and it sort of does things to meet their um, expectations. But there's not that sense of really sort of internalizing that and saying, that's me. And so anything that comes as praise, there's kind of a sense that, well, it's not really deserved. It's not really me that did that. It's this fabrication that did it. And this fabrication is really kind of false. And so you're praising something that's really kind of false. And so and so you can't really take that praise. You can't take the affirmation. You can't take acceptance. You can't take, I mean, there's a lot of things that all of a sudden you just feel like you can't, that don't come. And so when people give you those things to try to boost your sense of self-esteem, it just doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't work. Um, and then the other thing is that you don't really have the ability to commit because it's, come on, honey. Because I'm sorry, my cat wants to be part of this, but you have no ability to really commit to be part of the group, to be um, um, fully involved, because it's not really you that's getting involved. It's this facade or this shell, and it's got a ulterior motive, which is to keep you safe from anything causing you embarrassment or shame. And the last area I want to talk about with dysphoria is the spiritual sense of dysphoria. Um, there are a lot of people who are going through this that may come from a much more conservative religious background, a much more maybe fundamentalist or literalist, condemnatory type of religion, who think that start feeling like their religion is condemning them, is antagonistic to them. They may feel that God is rejecting them. They may feel like they're sinning. They may feel like, they're worthless. And so religion can really become a very difficult, and the whole spiritual journey can become a very difficult one for somebody who starts with a spirituality that's based in that type of interpretation. Um, Even when I was, because you've got this facade, there's an uncertainty in terms of, well, does God really love me? I mean, does God love the facade, but the facade's not me? Is God finding happy with the facade, but not happy with me? So there's this whole sense of trying to work out what your relationship with God is, and I think in large part my struggles with trying to work that out really led me to continuing to ask questions about the concepts of God that I have, and I'll talk a little bit about that in another video. But for this, it's this whole sense of dysphoria carries over to the spiritual world as well, or to the spiritual realm as well, and it really affects how you feel about God, how you feel about religion, and how you feel about yourself. We've talked a little bit about the different types of dysphoria that are for the transgender person. I don't know that I've covered everything that there possibly is, but certainly it's. I think it's a good start for it. One other thing, though, to note is that the level of dysphoria changes as you go through this whole process of determining who you are going to live as, which I sort of look at as transition in sort of a larger sense. It's not necessarily going from one state to another state. It's just trying to figure out, okay, now that I recognize that I have this dysphoria, um, and it's not a problem, it's not an issue, it's a dysphoria, and you really want to make a change. And so, what are the changes that you want to make? And they can be minimal or they can be major. Um, but as you go through this whole process of discerning what you want to do, how you want to respond to this dysphoria, um, there's a real sense of the dysphoria changes. Oh, come on, cat. And um, the change in dysphoria comes in for personal experience right at the moment. My sense of physical dysphoria is increasing as I become more accepting of myself as a woman. I become more resentful of a very masculine body. On the other hand, my emotional dysphoria has dropped. I'm feeling less secretive. I'm feeling less guarded. I'm feeling more open emotionally, more free to share my emotions. And I'm getting to even more so as I go through this. Socially, I feel that the need to sort of be guarded, to um, not be open in social situations has dropped away. I feel, having come out to everybody who's important in my life at least, um, I don't feel like I have anything that I have to hide. And so I can be very much myself and very honest and very open. And then spiritually, I feel like this has opened up and deepened my relationship with God. It's gone from being really more of an intellectual sense of God to a real spiritual, emotional, and intellectual um, connection with God. And so, as I go through this, I expect the sense of dysphoria to change in subtle ways. Um, Thinking about it, though, in that way helps me, at least, determine whether or not this is actually something that's been good for me. And I can say for most of what has really bothered me, it has been. And there's one area that still I have to make decisions about. I have to figure out what I want to do with that. And that's mostly in the physical area. So anyway, I do hope that this has been somewhat enlightening. I would like to talk about this some more in terms of a little bit more bringing it down to the personal level and talking about some of the experiences I'm aware of from other people. There's a lot of things I'm not. I think that will actually help people deepen their understanding of what I'm talking about. But for now, I think this is a good first cut at talking about dysphoria. And hopefully you have found this helpful. Hopefully it will help you if you're a cisgendered person, meaning a non-trans person, which is most people are cisgendered. Then having struggling with, I don't really understand what this means. Hopefully this will help you have a little bit of empathy or some way to kind of grab hold of what the transgender experience is like, because it's very difficult to kind of get that across to people who don't experience it. But anyway, hopefully you found this useful, and I hope that you liked it. Be nice if you even enjoyed it. But please subscribe to the channel. I'm not posting on a regular basis because there's a lot going on in life. Probably will be through the holiday season because we're coming up on the holidays. We're doing some traveling, and so it's going to be sort of catch or catch can. If you subscribe and you ask for notifications, then whenever I post something, you'll know about it. But thank you very much for watching through here, and I hope to see you, well, or for you to see me again soon. Thank you. Bye.